Well, good evening. My name is Tony Rosenbaum. I am the Interim Director of the Graham Center for Public Service. And on behalf of the Center and the Sam Proctor Oral History Project, I want to welcome you to the second of the presentations in our Proctor Lecture Series. We are delighted to have as the presenter this evening Robin Gibson, who has a most distinguished career of public service and professional accomplishment both at the University of Florida and subsequent to the University of Florida. I don't have time to share with you all of the distinctions and accomplishments he has recorded, but I want to share with you a few of them which seem to be particularly significant here at the University of Florida. First and most important, he graduated from the University of Florida. Discretion forbids, I should say, when. Simply, he graduated from the University of Florida as a classmate of Bob Graham's, and subsequently graduated from the University of Florida Law School in 1962 and received his Juris Doctorate in 1969. Among his many accomplishments, he has been chairman of the Board of Regents of the state of Florida, the state university system. He has been chairman of the Federal Judicial Nominating Committee for Florida. He is listed among the most highly regarded professional practitioners in a number of polls of Florida lawyers, and he has also been included in one category which leads me to suspect that below that handsome blue blazer there may be a crimson cape, since he is listed as a super lawyer. He has also served as a general counsel to Bob Graham when he was governor, and subsequently worked in Washington with Bob Graham. And he is currently a partner of Gibson and Valenti, got it right, Gibson and Valenti in Lake Wales. But his most significant accomplishment is that he had the enormous good sense and discretion to purchase a Prius, with which we share an affection. We're delighted to have Robin with us. Would you please welcome Robin Gibson?
Thank you, Tony. I think I should start by thanking everybody for being here. I know at least in one case, it is the ultimate sacrifice. Will Harrison is the best baseball fan I know. And officially, I saw this on TV, at the start of the season, the Tampa Rays were 100 to 1 shot to be in the World Series. They were at the very bottom. And this is the first game of the World Series. And I'm sure that if I were standing in the middle of the Harrison living room at 7:45, there would be a hum that would start up, and the VCR or the TiVo or something would spring into action. And there may be probably a few others around here as well. So I am very grateful that anybody at all would want to come hear about the history of the Florida University system on a night like this. My task is to bring you that history, and I'm going to do that from statehood on March 3rd, 1845, through to the present minute, and do it in 30 minutes. And I would like to save time for questions and comments. There are folks here who have been a part of this history, and they really know these answers better than I do. And then I would like to finish with one of Sam Proctor's favorite stories. So here we go. The background. Florida does not have a history or tradition that values education. This is due in part to the harsh realities of early Florida. With statehood in 1845, it was the least populated and the poorest of all the southern states. If every man, woman, and child in Florida could have been seated in what is today Ben Hill Griffin Stadium, most could scarcely read or write. Almost half would be in slavery, and there would still be 20,000 empty seats. The Civil War devastated the economy, which remained abysmal until federal troops ended Reconstruction by withdrawing in 1877. The few with wealth and position were educating their children in private academies or with home tutors, and then sending them to established colleges and universities elsewhere in the South. Public education for the rest of the folks was meager. County school districts established small schools known as common schools for the beginning grades. Several scattered state-supported schools offered the advanced grades, this is not college, along with some college courses. The late 1800s brought an economic upturn with the arrival of railroads, visitors, steamboats, and increased resident population. By 1905, Florida had 7 state-supported schools, all competing in the legislature for scarce public funds. 3 of the schools had boards of trustees, 1 was operated by a county, and the others were under the State Board of Education. Formation of a system. Into this 1905 setting strode Florida's new governor, the legendary Napoleon Bonaparte Broward. I love that name. A colorful progressive in the mold of Teddy Roosevelt, he was an activist who accomplished much for Florida. Governor Broward, Representative Henry Buckman, and Broward's trusted lawyer advisor, Nathan Bryan, all from Jacksonville, adroitly led a successful legislative effort to consolidate the 7 state schools into the 3 that we know so well. A college for white males in Gainesville, and a college for white females, and a coeducational college for African Americans in Tallahassee. The 1905 Buckman Act was a watershed event for Florida University system, and this university in particular. Its impact cannot be overstated. First, it created one board of control to operate all institutions. At the time, most public universities had individual boards. As universities in other states multiplied over the years, so did their boards. When Florida's system grew in number, its one board governance system was able to put overall state priorities first, rather than being limited to the needs of one institution among many. Second, while the segregation of races was typical for a southern state, the segregation of white males and females was counter to most public universities, which were coeducational. According to the memoirs of Vice President James Farr of the Florida Agricultural College in Lake City, it was all part of that school's intense competition to, quote, beat out, quote, the West Florida Seminary in Tallahassee. The first move was to change the name to the University of Florida, and second, to confine the school to males. Vice President Farr wrote, quote, if there were but 2 state institutions of higher learning for whites, one of them a university for men and the other a college for women, the former would win out in size and recognition in competition with the latter. Close quote. The Lake City political representatives accomplished both goals in the legislative session of 1903, the one that preceded the 1905 Buckman Act. Third, most land-grant schools devoted to agriculture and mechanical disciplines were freestanding schools, separate from the state's flagship university. The Buckman Act combined the land-grant school in Lake City with the liberal arts curriculum of the East Florida Seminary in Gainesville. As the years went on, this combination of land-grant, liberal arts, white, and male served to fulfill James Farr's prophecy. Most of the new programs and all of the professional schools were first placed at the University of Florida. What does this mean to us today? Today, Ohio State, also a land-grant / liberal arts combination, and the University of Florida enjoy the advantage of having the country's broadest range of disciplines on one campus. Fourth, the Buckman Act shut down 4 institutions and forced the survivors to eventually become post-secondary institutions. The 2 state-supported seminaries had opened in 1853 and 1856 as little more than elementary schools for local children of Ocala and Tallahassee. That's where we trace our beginnings. The 2 state-supported seminaries, by 1905, most locally supported common schools only went through the 10th grade. And the 7 state-supported schools offered a mix of high school and college courses. The new Gainesville school, although called the University of the State of Florida, had to continue to offer high school courses because the local schools weren't producing high school graduates. In 1908, Florida's high schools enrolled only 161 11th grade and 91 12th grade white males, which, after all, were the only ones eligible for admission to the university. Fifth, the Buckman Act's newly appointed 5-member Board of Control was placed on a collision course with the elected 5-member Florida Cabinet. This unique cabinet governance mechanism came from Florida's distrust of military governors after the Civil War. The governor could only serve 1 term, while the other cabinet members had no limits. Each had 1 vote. The cabinet would manage the state's day-to-day affairs by sitting in various governance capacities. When sitting as the state's Board of Education, it had operated all of the public education in Florida, including higher education. Now, they were confronted by this newly appointed Board of Control and its claim to the governance of higher education. The first conflicts occurred when naming the locations and selecting the presidents of the new institutions. The contest for the location of the University of Florida is the stuff of legend. Suffice it to say, and it really can't be dealt with adequately in this presentation, suffice it to say that the 2 boards agreed to meet together on the question, with each member having 1 vote. The decision came down to the 2 finalists, Lake City and Gainesville. After elaborate afternoon presentations by officials from Lake City and Gainesville, cheered on by supporters who had come to Tallahassee in chartered trains, the members of the 2 boards went behind closed doors to debate and vote. A number of 5-5 ballots ensued. The deadlock was dramatically broken late that night when Attorney General switched his vote from Lake City to Gainesville, and that made all the difference. See. You know, I could give this without even looking at this thing. One thing I saw, Mike Gannon, I came to his, and he read everything. And that's the way to keep it short, so that's what I'm trying to do. The vote for the president of the University of Florida proceeded differently. The Board of Control met and elected Dr. Andrew Sled, the former president of the deposed Lake City institution, as the president of the University of Florida, and also elected Dr. Albert Murphy, the former president of Florida State College in Tallahassee, as the president of the newly named Florida Female College. The Board of Education promptly met the same day and elected Murphy as president of the University of Florida. Since two different presidents had been elected to head the same institution, the two boards decided it was time for another closed-door session. At the session, Governor Broward reportedly sided with his appointees and convinced the Board of Education to withdraw its claim of authority to name university presidents. SLED thereby became the first president of what was known initially in Gainesville as the University of the State of Florida. SLED had a short and tumultuous presidency. Although supported by the Board of Control, he had not been the Board of Education's choice and was often at odds with its members. When Governor Broward's term expired in 1908, he lost all support on the Board of Education, which revived the claim of authority to hire and fire presidents. A showdown between the two boards was averted with SLED's resignation. The Board of Control then elected Murphy, who served successfully for 18 years. 50 years of stability. While Florida was experiencing the ups and downs of World War I, Prohibition, Florida land boom and bust, the Great Depression won, and World War II, the same three institutions comprised the university system. The main tension point for university governance remained the Board of Education, which retained oversight of the Board of Control, approved presidential appointments and expenditures. In time, stable leadership led to accommodations. P.K. Young of Pensacola chaired the Board of Control for 19 of the 23 years he was a member. While we had a new governor every 4 years, some of the cabinet/Board of Education members made virtual careers out of their positions. In truth, Florida had been called upon to create a higher education system from very humble beginnings. Of the states in existence prior to the Civil War, we were the last to fund a public college, last to create a public university, and last to create a normal school for teaching. The two white schools, now known as the University of Florida and the Florida State College for Women, did not become, honest to goodness, post-secondary institutions until 1913, when completion of the 12th grade became a requirement for admission. The three institutions steadily increased enrollment and programs as they progressed through the first half of the 20th century. The Florida Agricultural and Mechanical College struggled with the Board of Control about whether the education of blacks in a segregated society should be for the practical skills associated with agriculture and mechanics or the classic education found in the white schools. The Florida State College for Women stressed liberal arts and grew in quality and stature, gaining its Phi Beta Kappa chapter in 1934. UF added disciplines and strengthened its programs, particularly in agriculture. It received its Phi Beta Kappa chapter in 1938. President Tigert was a co-founder of the Southeastern Conference, but his Gators never won it. Growth and tumult. All that stability came to an end after World War. Return of veterans with GI Bill in hand. After coming from other climates to experience their military training in Florida, they wanted to return to learn and live. The state and the university system experienced explosive growth. UF and now Florida State University became co-ed, quickly outgrew their facilities, and threw up temporary structures while plans were underway for the new institutions. During the 1950s, the Board of Control was called upon to look backward and forward at the same time. The backward part involved the onslaught from the Johns Committee. Charlie Johns was the former president of the Senate and leader of a dominant rural faction in the legislature. He had been the acting governor upon the death of Dan McCarty, but was defeated in a pivotal midterm election by Leroy Collins, who later successfully ran for a full 4-year term, becoming the first Florida governor to serve for more than 4 consecutive years. Johns returned to the Senate and became Florida's version of Joe McCarthy. His investigative committee spent 9 years searching public schools and universities for communists, homosexuals, subversive publications, and writings and lectures that challenged Orthodox religion and the literal interpretation of the Bible. Teaching certificates were revoked, and university professors were driven from their positions. The Board of Control and Executive Secretary Broward Culpepper openly opposed the Johns Committee in favor of academic freedom. Eventually, Johns' cause was defeated when its proposed implementing legislation was unanimously rejected in committee, and his investigative committee was not reappointed. In the midst of dealing with the Johns Committee, the board was simultaneously looking forward to meet future needs. In 1962, the Board of Control authorized a comprehensive evaluation of the university system and its future with what was called the Space Era Education Study. The study made specific recommendations for new programs and new universities to meet the burgeoning need. Probably reacting to the Johns Committee, it also delivered a scathing attack on what it called political influence in Florida's higher education structure and urged immediate reforms. Senator John Matthews of Jacksonville introduced a bill to create a 9-member Board of Regents with expanded powers and longer terms to replace the Board of Control. The naming of a chancellor as chief executive officer, initially opposed by the presidents, was also approved by the legislature. The voters approved bond financing to replace pay-as-you-go funding for universities and community colleges. The system was on a roll. 6 new universities were created and financed from the ground up in 12 years. The reality was that the greatest need to be served was in South Florida, while the existing institutions were in North Florida. Nonetheless, the university system had a difficult time elbowing its way in to the established educational structure. The large legislative delegation in Dade County was protective of its constituent private university, the University of Miami. The most welcoming location for the state's first new university in 52 years turned out to be in Tampa, where it was named the University of South Florida, not because it was located in South Florida, but because it was the southernmost university in the system at the time. The newly created community colleges were protective of the first 2 years of post-secondary work. Florida Atlantic University, University of West Florida, Florida International University, and the University of North Florida all had to open as upper division and graduate institutions without freshmen and sophomores. Only USF and Florida Technological University, now the University of Central Florida, opened as 4-year institutions. The new tension point. The legislature responded to the charges of political interference by curtailing the Board of Education. It then substituted itself as the political body with its own opinions as to how universities should be governed. In 1971, Senate leaders led an unsuccessful attempt to abolish the Board of Regents on the grounds that it was not effectively managing universities. Chancellor E.T. York was concerned about the direction the university system was taking. He obtained the appointment of a commission on the future of Florida's public universities. The commission's 1978 report acknowledged the explosive expansion, but declared there was an urgent need for the improvement of quality to attract economic development and research funds. One of the Commission's recommendations was to extricate the Board of Regents from legislative politics and provide it with constitutional status. The Constitutional Revision Commission was in session that same year. It placed such an amendment on the ballot, along with a number of other proposed amendments. While the university amendment was among the more popular, all went down together. Legislative leaders were angered by the attempt at constitutional autonomy. In 1979, legislative moves were made to either abolish the Board of Regents or curtail its authority by creating a two-tiered system with local governing boards for each university. In an appearance before the House Committee on Higher Education, Regent Kreiser stated that such a system would lead to, quote, disharmony, conflict, and jurisdictional disputes, quote, and, quote, internecine warfare among the universities, end quote. The onslaught continued. In 1980, a measure to abolish the board passed both houses, only to be vetoed by Governor Graham. By the year 2000, Democrat Lawton Childs had appointed most regents, who were then facing a Republican governor and legislature. The legislature wanted a medical school at FSU, which the regents refused to approve. An angry legislature responded by abolishing the Board of Regents. This time, there was no veto. On June 30th, 2001, Florida's 96-year history of a citizen board devoted to the governance of universities came to an end. Governance from a citizen board was replaced by the legislature's, quote, K-20 education code, quote. It was an enormous bureaucratic tome consisting of 1,786 pages of legislation, placing all of public education from kindergarten through the highest graduate programs in one gargantuan pyramid under the newly appointed Citizen Board of Education, with the ultimate control over policy and operation reserved for the legislature. Each university was given a board of trustees, and Regent Kreiser's prophetic warning was realized. The universities spent $2.5 million in 1 year for lobbyists in their competition for legislative appropriations and capital projects. University buildings, programs, and high-salaried positions became the reward of choice for outgoing legislative leaders victimized by term limits. Constitutional governance arrives. In 2002, U.S. Senator Bob Graham and a statewide steering committee became convinced that Florida had had enough of political interference with the mission of universities. This assessment was confirmed in an exploratory phase consisting of campus consultation, public forums, 4 focus groups in 2 cities, and a comprehensive statewide survey. A constitutional governance system using the structure of the North Carolina system with the constitutional protections found in California, Michigan, and Minnesota was carefully drafted to carry out the will of the people as expressed in the exploratory phase. The steering committee, chaired by Joan Raffier of Orlando, conducted a campaign to place the amendment on the ballot and then to succeed in the election. The measure did indeed represent the will of the people, who adopted it by a vote of greater than 60%. With this action, Florida joined the ranks of those states with university governance systems that are part of their fundamental law and can only be amended or abolished by the people themselves. As appearing in Section 7 of Article 9 of our Constitution, the Board of Governors, and only the Board of Governors, quote, shall operate, regulate, control, and be fully responsible for the management of the whole university system, close quote. Since the amendment's adoption, the legislature has struggled to hold on to as much control as possible. It still lawfully retains the power of appropriations, and the current Board of Governors has been reluctant to assert the authority it has been given by the people for fear of economic retaliation. After abysmal public funding and the lowest tuition among the country's top 75 public universities, Bob Graham, former Congressman Lou Frye, and professors from 4 universities filed suit last year to declare the legislature's business-as-usual acts to be unconstitutional. The Board of Governors joined as co-plaintiffs. That suit has been underway in Tallahassee Circuit Court for 1 year and 4 months. And that is a quick history of the Florida university system up to the minute. And I would love, I hope you've got your questions. I would love to have any questions or comments that you might have in view of the folks that are attending this that know more, as much or more about it than I do. I think this is really more of a seminar than it is a lecture, so that's the way we'll handle it. George.
Who drafted the lawsuit?
Who drafted the lawsuit?
Yeah.
The same guy that drafted the amendment. I can't claim, well, I claim credit for the first complaint, but then we have excellent co-counsel, and including Steve Grimes, representing the Board of Governors when they joined, and Vicki Shirley, who is the general counsel for the university system, and they're very fine lawyers. That's your team, and your loyal servant. Ma'am? 3 months ago. I would have thought that we would have, actually, these motions that we've been involved in with very heavy briefing, almost like appellate court for this circuit judge, who does not have research assistants like the appellate courts do. But these are just preliminary motions. They're just motions to dismiss, although everything kind of is involved in these motions to dismiss in this lawsuit because it's more of a question of law than it is of fact. In a lawsuit with a question of fact, you'd still have the testimony to come, but there's virtually no testimony in this. It's all legal questions. And it's been 1 year and 4 months, and we're not even at issue. And what that means, as far as lawyers are concerned, you got a complaint over here, and then when you got all these motions in between, but when you finally get to an answer, the complaint alleges these things, and the answer says, all right, we agree with that, but we disagree with that and that and that. And then finally, you join the controversy, and you have the issues that are to be decided. And so we're not even at issue, as lawyers say. And this thing is not going to be decided in the circuit court. It's going to have to be decided in the Supreme Court. And Steve Grimes and I are consulting our mortality tables to see if we'll even be around the way it's going. We hope to bypass the District Court of Appeal, but that's up to the District Court of Appeal.
Robin, I want to ask you that.
Sure.
And I was trying to remember if this is correct. When you were on the board and you became chairman, the legislature had not adequately funded this. And it was your proposal that we freeze the enrollment on all the campuses.
No, but we did talk about freezing the enrollment, reducing it. It wasn't mine in particular, I wouldn't say. But I've always felt that you've got to get what you pay for, you know, and let's be realistic. I mean, there will always be a tension between the legislature and universities. The universities will never feel that they have enough, and the legislature will always be trying to treat universities just as they would, say, a water plant. You know, you want to get the most production out of it for the least amount of tax dollars. So that's the tension that will always exist.
Raise the noise, and that got everybody's attention. Maybe it's just because we talked about it.
Yeah.
Did it at the University of Florida at that time.
Okay, well, all right. I told you these guys would know more about this than I, and I think that's probably right. Marshall?
Robin, on this point, you mentioned that in drafting the constitutional amendment, you looked at California and Minnesota and North Carolina and Michigan. All of those states, by reason of their constitutional position, had lump sum funding to a governing board, as opposed to the ad hoc funding that we have historically had in Florida. Until that issue is resolved or changed, it's going to be very difficult to
Right.
have any meaningful.
Well, there are several things on that. Even though North Carolina has as good a system as there is, it's not constitutional. It's statutory. But it's because the state of North Carolina has a history and tradition of supporting their universities. And then in the others, there's not necessarily lump funding, but it has worked out pretty much to be that way. The best constitutional, in my view, the best constitutional provision in the country is Georgia. It is clear, clean, straight to the point, and specifically provides for lump sum funding. And it's in the Constitution. That was a reaction the public had to all the racial problems they had, Lester Maddox and everything else, and they just finally got mad and put the best one on the books. David?
This sort of takes off from where you left off there. About 2.5 years ago, the Askew Institute did a conference on higher education in Florida, and we had William Friday as a keynote speaker. And Friday's comment then was we had the worst system of higher education in the United States. And he went on to talk at some length what the problems were, but he said we've got such a bifurcated system and way, way too much political intrusion in the system. And he said, frankly, if we don't change it, he said Florida's reputation nationally will always suffer.
Quick story. First, in my reading, preparing for this, I saw where the South has kind of a history of this political involvement, and as distinct from some of the other areas. But the quick story is this. In the inauguration of Marshall Kreiser as president of the university, we had a big blowout at the O'Connell Center and a huge dinner. And Bob Bryan decided he wanted the head of the what he felt was the state's best public institution to be here. And they call them chancellors in the California system. His name was Mike, was it, Bob? Hayward? Yeah, I can't, well, anyway. That close. Anyway, there he was. Okay. Okay. And I happened to be chair at the time, so the way they were sitting, people, we were right next to each other. And delightful guy. And so we were talking, and finally I wanted to ask him this question. I knew he came from what is the best public system in the country. And I said, I'd be curious as to your impressions. And he looked, we were sitting at the top row, and there was banks of people sitting in front of us at what you might call the head table. and there were just all these legislators down here, and he looked and he says, he says, this is a pretty political place. That was the difference. That was the difference. David?
At this conference, we had Joe Pickens and Evelyn Lynn were both there, and they nodded in agreement throughout Bill Friday's comments. And then went back to the legislature and kept doing the same old things over and over again.
Sure. Well, Bill Friday and Clark Kerr in California demonstrate the fact that it's leadership. I can't help but think if we had a Clark Kerr, we might prevail. We've certainly got the structure for it now. We're ready. We've got the platform. We can take off. And the one thing that this history demonstrates is Florida's different from a lot of states in Northeast, Midwest, and certainly California, where their achievement is, in effect, they're at their achievement or their achievement is behind them. When you take where we came from, our rate of ascension, our achievements ahead of us, just a question of how well we do it. Will?
This question of capping enrollment, I know when I came here, Marshall was the president, that was one of the things that was in the air, that we were going to be capped at 35,000, and yet in the dean's office each year, we kept seeing more and more students to be taught each year. And as you went around the state and talked to people and fundraising and else, it was a difficult situation because one can say, yes, we really should cap this, and yet we penalized in that way some very terrific students and parents and alumni who didn't understand. So I was never quite sure how to come down on that. Whatever happened when Lombardi got here, we just kept getting more students in all the time. And I understand. I mean, I understand a bit of that, why we did that, because we had tremendous, we still do, we still have tremendous number of students wanting to get here. So do you have any thoughts about this capping process? I
do. I was in favor of capping enrollment, as George said some time ago. I mean, long before now, really. And I would express those things, and then the next year, the enrollments would go up. And so I would ask guys like Brian, how come the enrollment goes up? And Brian would whisper in my ear, it's FTE. So that's the problem you have. It's a matter of money and or quality. And we will always be faced with that. I personally believe that we should have the discipline to cap. During this period of time when we were capping or talking about capping enrollments, the new universities were making enrollment projections that they were not meeting. They were planning their universities based on enrollments that weren't there. There was plenty of places for the students to go. It was just that they all couldn't come to the University of Florida. And we miss out on a number of great students by doing that. But I think that to compete in this country, we have to concentrate on quality. And I would be in favor of capping the enrollments.
Probably the founding issue that's arisen in more recent years are the Bright Future scholarships.
Yes.
Bright Future's idea was to keep the bright Florida high school graduates in Florida who formerly went to Duke and Wake Forest and wherever else. It has been successful in doing that, but the thresholds were established much too low. It's not based on merit, and it's not based on need. And until that is restructured, you can't do away with it.
No.
Although the local senator made a speech here a week ago saying that we ought to phase out Bright Futures in the next 10 years. We shouldn't do that, but we ought to get a realistic program because you can't raise tuition when the legislature,
I don't think Bright Futures is really the problem with tuition, and that's because you can raise tuition, you can put the same money toward Bright Futures, it'll just be that fewer students receive those scholarships. And the legislature is not out any more money because of raised tuition. The main problem is these tuition fee contracts. That's the main problem. Prepaid tuition. That's the main problem. But that's, other states have overcome that. We can overcome that. We've got to, they're contractual, we have to honor them. That's all there is to it. It's that simple. The tuition goes up, they got a good deal. That's just all there is to it. Move on. But just think, if you were a legislator and your campaign needed to be funded by the well-to-do for the next session, and most of these Bright Futures scholarships are going to kids who have the well-to-do homes that can afford the study, that have the right priorities, all that kind of stuff. And now you're saying, well, I'm going to cut out this scholarship that your kid can get, even though he comes from a wealthy home and everything else. Your kid has excelled, and we don't want him to go to Harvard, so keep him here. And, I've read this several times, and Sandy Dallenbert just pounds all over the idea that what it amounts to is a BMW for the kid. I don't think Bright Futures is really the issue. The tuition contracts are the problem.
Is term limits. Legislators can make bad decisions today in Florida, and they're not around to deal with the consequences of those bad decisions. Single-member districts and term limits make it inefficient and inappropriate in this state.
I have, in my next life, my priority is going to be doing away with gerrymandering. And one of my professors was the man who this building next door is named after, Manning Dower. And in the time of reapportionment, he came up with a plan that respected county boundaries and reapportioned the legislature almost as closely as the precise boundary making did. And the court went with the precise boundary making. In my view, that is the single worst thing that our government does, is permit this gerrymandering, which has progressed to an exact science with the data management that's now present in computers. David?
No, I thought what Marshall tried to do and you tried to do was heroic on controlling the enrollment at the universities, but our state from 70 to 2005 grew by over 11 million people. And that was the challenge. I mean, how do you accommodate 11 million people coming into the state, many of whom had children who were going to be at college age at some point? I think where we made our mistake was we didn't build, like California did, a college system.
Mm-hmm.
We kept the university system. We added on to it by allowing campuses to be added to universities at various points in where the need was in the state. And I think as a consequence, we've got the system today with 4 of the largest 10 universities in the United States, in the state of Florida.
Well, we have been put into that position because of the realities of underfunding. The only way we can conduct a university is to have these large numbers. And the way we did it was you would have large universities, and then everything couldn't be excellent, so you would have a center of excellence. And you'd milk everybody just a little bit to make this one center of excellence. So you had marine engineering at FAU and so one campus didn't have what was funded at least to be excellent. And that was just the only way we could do it with the money that we had to work with and be in any way competitive. California spends a lot more money on their education system, and they have wonderful universities in lots of different places. We couldn't come close to being able to afford that the way that they do. And of course, Charlie Reed is out there in the head of that system. That's just the reality. And I'll give you one soapbox deal. And Will has heard this a number of times. One of the things that I believe is counterproductive is to listen to the folks of the university campuses who rail against the legislature as to why they're not doing their job. They've found their scapegoat, they've found the villain, they're happy. What we need to do and what we have been doing is assess the situation. Take it as it is, all right? That's the playing field. Now let's go from here, let's excel. And folks, I'll tell you, there's only one way for us to do it. And that's to put our efforts in that University of Florida Foundation, because supplementing public funding, which will never be adequate, supplementing public funding is the only way we're going to get there. So we have our choice. We can sit back here and rail at the legislature and feel good about that, or we can take responsibility and take our university and our system to where it ought to go. We're not going to get it from the public. We're not going to get it from the public. There's nothing wrong with the legislators. They have to go home and face their constituents. And their constituents have educated their children up north. So that's the reality. Take the reality and go. And so we, in planning this place, we went to several universities. One of the places we went was the Humphrey Institute at University of Minnesota. University of Minnesota is basically a private university. They have received less and less and less in the way of public funding. They basically treat the legislature at Minnesota as if it were their largest donor, like the Ford Foundation or something. And they get busy and they raise the rest of the money themselves. That's the only way to do it.
University of Virginia has done that also.
Mm-hmm. There just is not another solution.
That's the difference in law.
Yeah.
Is those places control the tuition.
Our Board of Governors has the constitutional authority to set tuition. And if Steve Grimes and I live long enough, we'll prove that in the Florida Supreme Court. I don't want to prolong this. Uh-oh. All right. I've got a story for you. Yeah, that's right. This is one of Sam Proctor's favorite stories. And by the way, if Sam Proctor's thesis, his master's thesis, is a book on Napoleon Bonaparte Broward, which is a bestseller at the Florida presses. I tell you, master's thesis, it's a magnificent book. Broward was a gun runner in advance of the Spanish-American War. It just goes on and on. And then his PhD thesis was on some of the same subjects having to do with the university. I loved preparing for this because it has Sam's fingerprints all over it. And and this is one of Sam's favorite stories told to Graham. And I've heard it before, so I called Graham to get the details on it. And I said, where can I read about this so I can make sure it's accurate. He says, that's the trouble with you. Lawyers always want to be accurate. He said, but then he proceeded to give me off the top of his head this story with all the accuracies. He loves it as much as Sam did. This has to do with Henry Flagler and his 3 wives and the University of Florida, the University Auditorium. Flagler came to Florida in the 1870s because his first wife had tuberculosis and needed a favorable climate for her health. Came to St. Augustine, quickly got bored, and he concluded that what St. Augustine needed was a magnificent hotel equivalent to those that he had seen on the Riviera. Flagler, who was a partner of Rockefeller's and was immensely wealthy, he built that hotel. The Ponce de Leon Hotel is one of the most magnificent structures you could possibly imagine. It's Flagler College today. It's just terrific. So there's the hotel. Then he decides that what he needs is, he doesn't have enough customers for this hotel, so he's going to build a railroad. And he built the Florida East Coast Railroad. And the headquarters for that was in St. Augustine. His wife died. And after a while, he took up, to the embarrassment of his friends, with a flashy New York showgirl and married her, brought her to St. Augustine. The trouble was that she became more and more progressively mentally imbalanced. Apparently there was nothing wrong with her physically, but she was mentally imbalanced. And then she wound up being institutionalized in upstate New York, permanently insane. And then he met Lil Keenan. Lil Keenan was of college age, and he was infatuated with her. He wanted to marry her. The trouble was, the only ground for divorce in both Florida and New York was adultery. Now that's kind of difficult to arrange when someone is institutionalized in upstate New York. So he had to figure out something else. In 1903, he gave a man named Brown, who was the chief clerk of the House Finance Committee, he gave this man $100,000, and he gave them some proposed legislation that his lawyer had drawn, stating that permanent insanity would be a ground for divorce, and stating that it only needed to be on the books for 2 years. Brown, the bagman, took $100,000 to Tallahassee and spread it around. To tell you a little bit about how things worked in Florida in those days, that proposed legislation became law. And then Brown came back to Flagler and gave him $30,000. He said, $30,000, what's this for? He says, the legislators from Lake City refused the money. So the legislators from Lake City occupied a warm spot in Henry Flagler's heart. Now we move forward to 1905. 1905, as you recall from the earlier, Lake City and Gainesville were the two contestants, the finalists, for the location of the University of Florida. Flagler, in gratitude to Lake City, said, let it be known that if Lake City were chosen as the spot for the University of Florida, that there would be a substantial contribution that would find its way to the university. Well, Attorney General Ellis swung the tide, and Gainesville got it, And Flagler was chagrined. He withdrew his offer for a contribution to the new university because it was going to Gainesville. A few years later, Flagler is in the St. Augustine Hospital, very ill, and presumably not far from going to meet his maker and give this $50,000 to the university so that he would have complied with his promise. Dr. Anderson did exactly as he was told, went to the University of Florida, gave them Flagler's $50,000, and the University of Florida, realizing that the money came from Anderson, and it was just what they needed to finish out the university auditorium with this magnificent pipe organ that you see in there today. Gene and I were in a concert just 2 weeks ago. It was beautiful, magnificent. $50,000 bought that organ. And the University of Florida named it after Anderson, who was the guy that gave him the money. What a story. No wonder Sam loved Florida history. What a story. And you think about it with the railroad magnate and the whole thing between Lake City and Gainesville and where would the university go, and the purchasing of the vote from the Florida legislature. It all ties together. And then Graham tells me that there's a sequel. He said when he was a state senator, one day he's sitting there and it turns out that on the very same day, two things were passed into law. One was the adoption of the no-fault divorce in Florida, and coupled with that was the repeal to give water to the university if it would come from Lake City to here. And it happened on the same day. That's enough. Let's go see the ball game. Thanks a lot.